Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Mentzen GRILLUJE Extra. My guest today is Benjamin Wharton, an Englishman living in Poland near Toruń. Hello Ben.
Hey, thanks for having me on the show.
After graduating from law school in the UK, Ben works now as an English communication specialist, helping Polish businesses and professionals improve their spoken and written English, including KANCELARIA Mentzen, which is how we first met.
Once again, thank you for having me on the show. Usually it's my clients on this side of the camera, so it's a new experience for me, but I'm excited to answer your questions today.
First of all, I need to start with the most important question. What's the deal with the British taps? Why do you have one for hot and another for cold water?
Well, I guess, Sławomir, how would you simultaneously freeze one hand while burning the other? You know, it's like a sauna and a cold plunge.
This is
it's healthy.
This is stupid.
I could tell you something where we have better taps than you have in Poland. It might be controversial, but I think we have better beer.
Hell no!
Yours is good, of course.
How did it come about that you live in Poland?
Well, it's a tale as old as time. I met the love of my life, who is my wife now. She is a Polish citizen, of course. And I think in Poland it's quite a common story, right? But where our story might be a little bit more unique is that we met each other in China. After university, I saw an opportunity to live and work in China, and I took it. And while I was there, that's where I met my wife, who, as I said, is Polish, and she was there studying Chinese.
You and your wife met in China. Tell me something that people don't know about China.
Well, it was unexpected for me, but in the day-to-day life, I felt that Chinese people were a little more free than we are in Europe, which is kind of counterintuitive, right? You think they're totalitarian government, and, you know, in regards to politics, they're not so free. But in the day-to-day, they have less regulations and rules. So, for example, traffic rules are kind of a guide, not really necessarily rules where you get given tickets and things. When it comes to running businesses, they have much more freedom. So, for example, you see street vendors selling food without licenses and things like this. And one of the biggest differences I felt was the difference in zoning laws. So in Europe, you have a residential building and you can only have living apartments in there. In China, that doesn't exist. You can have an apartment building and on the 16th floor, you have shops, cafes, barbers, schools, all inside residential apartments. And one time...
Is it convenient?
No. I'll give you an example. Actually, I went one time into an apartment building up to the 16th floor, and I kid you not, there was a bar.
16th floor?
On the 16th floor of an apartment building. So imagine if you were the guy who bought the apartment next door to this guy who decided to open a bar. You have nothing you can do about it because over there the regulations allow him to just run his business in this apartment building. So they are freer in some respects, but it's not always a good thing, of course.
So obviously you found your way to Poland. Mm-hmm. Why did you decide to settle down here and not in the UK?
Well, I had already made my mind up before moving back from China to Europe. And it started when my wife and I decided to visit each other's parents for the first time. So we flew back from China to Poland in August. And my first view of Toruń, it was a hot summer day. The cafes were spilling out into the market square. And I just remember this feeling of peacefulness watching the people sitting at these tables, enjoying coffees and ice creams and things. And I just felt like it was a nice place to live. And what settled the score for me is after we visited Poland, we went to the UK, also in August. And it was wet and cold and windy. And I said, there's just no way I'm coming.
Typical British weather.
Typical British weather, yeah. Exactly.
What surprised you when you first came to Poland?
So you might be surprised by this answer, but my first impression of Poland was how clean and well-kept your public bathrooms are. I know, it seems crazy, but I just lived in China for 3 years, and we landed in Warsaw, and we're driving to Gdansk, and we stopped in a highway service station. And it was like everything was brand new. So clean. And the best part about it, you didn't have to pay for it. And if I think about comparing that to the UK bathrooms, which you have to pay for, the English ones are more like the Chinese bathrooms. So for me, that was the first impression. But on a more serious note, I was blown away by Poland. I had no idea you had such beautiful old cities and beaches, mountains, forests. I just didn't know anything like that. Before I came here, my initial thoughts about Poland was that it was kind of Siberian and Soviet.
With polar bears.
With polar bears, with communist blocks everywhere, and, you know, just grim weather. And I think after living in Poland for so many years, that's how I now see England.
Do you and your wife experience any cultural clashes?
Yeah, I think it's normal when you have like an international relationship like this. It's bound to happen that there's some little differences in upbringing and society that appear in a relationship. So one of the most common, I think, is the difference in Poland between being direct and being polite. So I feel like in Poland, the more familiar you are with someone, the more direct you can be, right? So you would just say, Sławomir, give me that water. Yeah, you would say something like this. And in England, we kind of keep a general level of politeness, even with people you're familiar with. So you would say, would you pass me that? Or could you pass me that? So, you know, from time to time, my wife says, do this. And why is she being so mean, you know? But I've come to learn that, you know, in Poland, someone being direct with you means that they like you. They feel close enough that they can be direct. So it's learning curve for both of us. But the effect of that has been our neighbours, when they see me and my wife talking to each other, I guess we've found some middle ground. And they think that we're incredibly polite to each other all the time. And it's quite nice to hear that.
You have children and they live in Poland. How do you manage that? What is it like to live in a two-language household?
That's right. Actually, I have two children. They're both girls. Both Polish citizens, aged 5 and 1. And, you know, managing children in Poland, I think it's great because I know Poland is safe. I can let them out of the house and I'm not worried about kidnappings or something like this. I'm comfortable with their teachers taking them on trips in the city centre and they just walk around. So from that aspect, I think it's great. Regarding language, in our household, we do speak 2 languages. But we speak mostly English at home. So when my children go to school, they speak mostly Polish, of course. And it's an interesting situation because in our house, we start to mix the languages. And I think when my parents come to visit, they're always surprised how easily we just flick between Polish and English. In the past, I would say I had some concerns, especially for my eldest daughter. When she was around 3 years old, we got reports from her school that she wasn't at the same level as everyone else in her class when it comes to speaking Polish, which for me was a concern. But now that she's 5, we can't shut her up in English or in Polish. She just talks and talks and talks. And I see that although she started later, she can now speak 2 languages better than I can speak. And it's great to have her because I don't need Google Translate anymore. If I'm in the shop and I forget the word for something, she's there. She will help me translate this. Yeah.
How do you find living in Poland? Do you miss anything from the UK?
So I don't really miss anything from the UK, except for, of course, family and friends.
And 2 taps.
And 2 taps, of course, yeah. How else will I freeze my hands and burn them? But, you know, I have been welcomed by a very loving Polish family, so I don't miss this family connection. I see my Polish family every day. And, you know, sometimes I crave some English food. And I know Polish opinions about English food are not very good, but I would like to tell everybody that there are some hidden gems in there.
So you miss the horrible British breakfast?
Horrible British breakfast?
Yes.
World famous, delicious British breakfast.
What about work? What are the main differences between working in Poland compared to the UK?
I think Poland has more of a culture of hard work. I see it everywhere. You know, we have many immigrants in the UK from many parts of the world, and we only say Polish people are the hardest working. It's a common theme in Britain to say that. And when I got here, I did see the same kind of thing. So I see that people are more willing to do overtime, to make work more part of their life. There's not so much of a focus on work-life balance here. People will go to work, they will have side jobs, and it just seems like people are more energetic about creating wealth for themselves here. So personally, I like working in that environment. Why do I think that is? When I moved to Poland, I think you had almost zero benefits system. There was no welfare. If you don't work, you don't live, right? Or you can't live. So people had to work, and it's kind of a natural state, right? In the wild, you would have to work for food, for example.
What year did you come to Poland?
It was 2018.
We have 500 plus.
Really?
Yes.
I didn't know
It was
that.
established in 2016.
Okay. I didn't have a child at that point, so I guess I didn't know about it. But I would also say that 500 plus, in the grand scheme of things, is still not enough to live, right? Especially if you have a child. I will compare it to the UK. You know, we have quite a big welfare state where many people decide that it's just not worth going to work every day when they can have an almost the same amount of money from the government for doing nothing. So because you don't have that in Poland, I feel like people are more willing to work and work harder even.
And what are the biggest differences between Polish society and the UK society?
Oof, that's a question for the philosopher, Sławomir, but I will try to answer it as best I can. I think in Poland you have a healthy amount of national pride. You know, I see this when you have Flag Day. I see every house on my street waves a Polish flag from the front of their house. And in Britain, there is a difference to this, where our English flag has been associated with the far right, for example. So yeah, I know. And you will see politicians come out and say this, that flying the English flag is a racist thing to do. In England. It's just absurd, right? So I like that. You have your Flag Day, you have your marches in Warsaw on 11/11, and it's a healthy form of patriotism, in my opinion. You're proud to be Polish, you're proud of your country, and yeah, it's nice to see, because my country isn't like that. So on a similar point, as well as having national pride, I feel like you also have a healthy distrust of the government, right? Am I wrong?
We have reasons for that.
Exactly. And in Britain, it's kind of the opposite way around. We don't have national pride, but people put way more trust in the government than they do in Poland. So if we think about the coronavirus vaccinations...
Even more stupid than two taps.
I agree with that. But if we go back to COVID, right? What was the vaccination rate in Poland? You had mid-50s?
50% maybe,
some mid-50s,
like that.
yeah. I think in Britain it was in the high 90%. Yeah. So as at the same time as not being proud of our nation, we also put way more trust in our government. So it doesn't make sense to me. It should be the way around Poland has it, you know.
What are the reasons for these differences?
Another difference is I feel like there's more optimism for the future in Poland. You know, there's this feeling that your children will have a better life than you had. And your parents will say the same about you, right? And especially better than your grandparents. Whereas in Britain, it's flipped on its head. It's kind of the other way around. People start to feel like their parents had it better than they have. And their grandparents lived in like a utopian society almost. So we have less optimism for the future. We're more pessimistic about the future of Britain. Whereas in Poland, you guys see the rise, you know? Another difference I can see between our countries is that there's more of a family orientation here and a priority for home ownership. So I know many people whose parents, you know, scrimped and saved to help them with a deposit to get their first house, for example. I feel like Polish people put a lot of importance on home ownership. Whereas in Britain, you know, it's okay at 18 to leave home and just start your life on your own, which, you know, has its benefits and drawbacks. But I do see in Poland, I see that you have an importance put on owning your first home. Like, it's an important first step in life. And that's a big difference. Another difference, of course, is how well you keep the things that you have. So I see villages in Poland are very well kept. Towns and cities look beautiful everywhere you go. Even small villages that are not even on the map. They kind of look nice, you know. Polish people tend to keep what they have in a nice way. Whereas if you go to Britain, of course, you will see the centre of London. It's kind of a tip. It's dirty. It's not clean. It's not well kept. And the final difference I see is I think Polish people eat much healthier than British people. You know, if I go to Polish supermarkets, you see way more fresh produce on the shelves, way less ready meals and frozen food and things like that. So yeah, I think in general, Polish people eat more healthily than British people.
What are the reasons for these differences?
That's a very difficult question to answer, but I will try my best. Are you familiar with this cycle of civilization where it goes like strong men create good times?
Yes, of course.
Yeah, good times create weak men create bad times. Yeah. So if I compare England or the UK to Poland, I think you're at different parts of this cycle.
Really?
Yeah, in recent history, you overthrew an oppressive government and changed the system completely, right? In Britain, we didn't have such a moment in our history, in recent times. So I feel like while Poland is kind of on the rise, you're entering the good times built by the strong men. Britain is ahead of the curve on this.
And how do you assess the impact of mass migration on life in the UK?
Oh, this is a question that could get me into trouble. I will try to answer.
Watch your words.
I'll try to answer diplomatically. The impact has been so big that I don't feel like it's the same country I grew up in. It doesn't feel like the same place I was born in. And I'm not alone in thinking that. I'm sure you're Polish, so you know who Monty Python are, right? You're familiar with John Cleese?
Of course.
Yeah, he said something very similar to that. He said, London doesn't feel English anymore. And it caused a media scandal. And for me, I question why is that such a scandalous thing to say? When the majority of people living in London are not English, how would it still feel English, right? So for me, the impact has been absolutely massive. And if you follow the government's own statistics, British people will be a minority in the UK by 2050. So if you trust the government's own statistics that British people will be a minority in the UK by 2050, just how English is the rest of the country going to feel? I would argue not very English at all.
Do you believe in the Great Replacement theory?
I think aspects of it are true. I think the result will be that there is a great replacement. However, I'm not so sure what are the reasons for this great replacement. And people who buy into that theory have very different ideas of why. But I don't care why. I just see that the result will be the same. So in some aspects, yes, I do believe.
What are the problems associated with migrants?
Oh, how much time do you have?
We have plenty of time.
I will try to get through most of them then. I think the most visible is crime. I think migrants, as much as people might argue, don't bring crime with them. It's quite obvious that in some aspects they do. And I'm not saying all of them do. But a large minority of them do come to the UK to commit crimes.
This is hate speech. Shame on you.
I can't go home. They will put me in jail. So, for example, I've read BBC reports on such things, as the UK drug trade is now run by Albanian mafia. Now, criminals are a problem in every country. Britain, of course, before immigration had criminals. And that's our problem to deal with. But with the introduction of mass migration, we now have to deal with criminals from other people's countries. And it just seems like a problem that we shouldn't have to face. I think another problem associated with the migrants is the cultural differences that we have. As we mentioned earlier about my wife and I, having these small cultural clashes in our relationship, I think that can happen on a societal level. So, for example, in Poland, you recently welcomed millions of Ukrainian refugees, right? And if you look at Poland and Ukraine on the map, they're next door to each other. I think on paper, the cultures are quite similar.
This is a very controversial
opinion. It's a very controversial opinion. I know. But what I will say is, after the influx of refugees, you start to notice those differences, right? And those differences kind of grow on people. So you're noticing those differences more and more, and they get bigger and bigger. And I think in Britain, you can times that by 100, because we don't just have immigration from the countries next door to us. We have immigration from all around the world, totally different cultures, and they all come to Britain and kind of clash and collide. And it's those differences and collisions of expectations, I think, that will have a long-lasting effect on the UK government itself. Britain's ability to project power in the world is being greatly diminished by this.
Why?
Let me explain. If we take Israel and Gaza as an example. In the UK, we have millions of Jewish people, And we also have millions of Muslim people. And if the UK government was to be decisive on this issue in any way, it would cause political turmoil at home. So our government's voice in the world is getting quieter and quieter. We're not able to project the same power we once did or have the same impact on global affairs as we once did. Because no matter where it will be, if it's India and Pakistan, how can the UK government take a stance without half of the immigrant population erupting into riots and violence about this? So I think it has a real impact on the future of the UK's place in the world.
Can the UK do anything to improve that?
I think the UK government could implement a few things that could change the situation in the UK. And if we take some inspiration from other places in the world, for example, mass migration arguably has been a success in some countries, like the United Arab Emirates, where I think Dubai has over 90% of an immigrant population right now. And that happened much faster than the immigration into Britain. So why is it so different there? What are the things they're doing that make it sustainable for the future? And I think one of the things that they do, and they do this well, is that they're very strict. They have their rules. They have their culture. And if you come into the country, you must respect that, or you are kicked out or put in jail, whatever it is. Whereas I think the opposite is true in Britain. I feel like when immigrants come to the UK, there's a feeling that they don't have to respect the UK way, but British people should respect their way. Which, you know, I think it's kind of obvious when you visit another country, you should respect their rules, right?
Yes, of course.
Yeah, if you go to China, you don't mention Tiananmen Square, right? If you go to Thailand, don't disrespect the monarchy. These are just things you don't do in those countries. But as I said, when people come to Britain, they feel entitled somehow to disparage the British way while also commanding respect for their way. And I think that we have this the wrong way around. So if Britain started to implement rules and laws equally for migrants and for native Britons, this could go some way to improving the situation. It might end up with this kind of feeling America had in the 19th century, where everyone's American. We have this shared set of values that are important to all Americans, which we don't currently do in the UK. Another thing the UK could do to improve this situation is just cut the welfare state, cut the benefits. Right now, we have migrants coming on boats to Italy, but they don't stay in Italy. They travel all the way through Northern Europe to catch a boat into Britain. We have to ask, why are they doing that? And the answer is, once they get to Britain, they're given debit cards with cash, they're given hotels to stay in, and they're just given things that you wouldn't expect if you went to another country to just receive for doing nothing for the country. I think if we cut that kind of spending, those kind of benefits, then there would be less incentive for people to travel all that way to go to the UK.
Let's change the topic. Why did the proud British people give up their right to the free speech?
Well, I think the road to hell is paved with good intentions, right? And I think liberals had a very successful emotional campaign on banning certain parts of speech. For example, racism or sexism. For most rational people who aren't racist or sexist, it's like, okay, I don't use those words anyway, so I have absolutely no problem in agreeing with this crime, this being a crime. However, once those rules were in place, what constitutes racism just spiraled out of control. So you might not believe me, but we can Google this. If you pull up Google right now and type in, "Is milk racist?" Is milk racist? You're going to find hundreds of articles explaining how milk is a symbol of white supremacy and how milk is racist, in fact. And it sounds absurd, right? You're looking at me like I'm speaking Chinese, but it's completely true. So once they got the ability...
What about chocolate? Is it also racist?
I will give your viewers a test right now. Pause this video, open a tab, go to Google and type in, "Is chocolate racist?" I guarantee there are articles. I guarantee it. So, as I said, the kind of context of what is hate speech just rapidly grew and became out of control. And it's gotten so bad in the UK that the standard to commit hate crime is that your speech offends someone. Let me say that again. The criminal standard is that you offended someone. So I will ask you, have you ever offended anyone, Sławomir?
Every day.
Every day, right? So that potentially makes you a criminal. So welcome to the mafia. When you make a criminal standard as subjective as someone is offended, I think you potentially make everyone a criminal. And that's where we're at in the UK right now. I can give you an example of Sam Melia. Maybe you're aware of him?
Yes, I have heard.
So his crime, which he was imprisoned for 2 years, was posting stickers in a town centre. Stickers which had statistics by the UK government. So, for example, Britons will be a minority by 2050.
Who was offended?
Well, the judge in this case actually decided that the things on the stickers didn't constitute a hate crime, but the judge wasn't comfortable allowing other people to do the same and imprisoned him for 2 years. So we went from a situation where it seemed reasonable to ban certain aspects of speech to where now you can be put in prison for repeating government statistics. And it's not only Sam Melia. In the UK, we have more prosecutions for comments on social media than in Russia. And the numbers are not even close. We're talking thousands of people prosecuted for crimes, and their crime is a comment on social media in the UK.
It sounds like Soviet Britain.
Yeah.
Is there any movement to reclaim your freedom of speech?
Well, I see some hope. Some prominent celebrities, for example, in Britain, who were traditionally on the left side of politics. So, for example, J.K. Rowling, Ricky Gervais, Stephen Fry, and as I mentioned before, John Cleese, they start to see the absurdity with this. That how can it be that you criminalize speech which offends someone? You don't have a right not to be offended. People get offended for anything these days. So I do see some movements to reclaim this free speech, but as it stands, I don't see any bipartisan movement in politics to reclaim this free speech. It seems to be mostly British people who are fed up with this.
What is your take on Brexit? Was it beneficial for the UK?
I like to say, nie mój cerk, nie moje małpy. It's a good question, and I think it may be a little too early to tell. And it depends on what do you mean by beneficial, of course, because, you know, I live in Poland now, and everywhere I go in Poland, I see these signs. It's built with EU funds. You know, you see it in schools, hospitals, roads, even on bike paths in the middle of forests. There's a little sign, built by the EU funds.
And on the Civic Platform office.
And on the Civic Platform office, of course. But while I was living in the UK, I don't remember ever seeing one sign like this in the UK. So I'm sure they exist, and I'm sure there are places where the EU funds invested. But personally, I didn't see one. And I think that's the kind of feeling British people had about Brexit, is that we're giving a lot of money and we're not getting much in return. So I think in the first place, we didn't benefit as much as other countries benefited from the EU. Also, I do believe that the UK taking control of its own destiny and future is always going to be a good thing. You know, if we disagree with the way the EU is being run or the direction it's heading, Britain now has the chance to go another way. Whereas if we remained part of the EU, we would kind of be stuck along for the ride based on other countries' votes. So taking back control of the destiny, for me, might not have economic benefits, but is a benefit anyway.
Why did the Labour Party achieve such a great result in the last election?
It was a landslide, right? I think they got 63% of seats. But if you look closely, I don't think the result is as good as it looks. So, for example, they secured 63% of the seats. That's huge, right?
It was the biggest victory for 160 years?
That's right. And it was also the most disproportionate election in recent British history. So, while they got 63% of the seats in the House of Parliament, they achieved that with just 33% of votes. And why did that happen? Well, I think Britain has a very different electoral system than in Poland. We have a first-past-the-post system, which means the UK was divided into small districts. Each district has a seat in the parliament, and the winner of each district will go to parliament. Now, what happened and what was special about this election specifically is the Conservatives had done a really bad job for many years, and typically right-wing Conservative voters didn't trust them anymore and created a new party, which is the Reform Party.
Nigel Farage.
That's right. And because of this, they split the kind of centre-right or right-wing politics down the middle. Many people continued to support the Conservatives, while many people wanted something new. And because of this split vote, the Labour Party was just able to edge over them in the majority of seats in the country. So that's why they have such a representation in the parliament right now. I think if we had the Polish system, which is more representational, we would see, instead of having 4 seats for Reform Party, they would have achieved something like 90 seats in parliament. And we would see a very different situation today.
So do you prefer the Polish voting system?
Yeah, I do actually. Now that I've been here and I see, you have more independent parties. It's not just a 2-party system anymore in Poland. You have the opportunity to have breakout parties, which I think Reform would have been in your system, right? Like I said, they had millions and millions of voters, but they achieved 4 seats. In Poland, that would have been 90 seats. It would have been an incredibly powerful movement, and it would have changed the situation in the UK right now.
This is another controversial opinion, because in Poland, many people believe that your system is much better.
So why do Polish people think the British system is better?
Because people in Poland believe that your system is much more representative, because the people choose the member of parliament, not the leader of the party.
So they choose more directly who will be in the Sejm, for example, or in the House of Parliament. It's not necessarily true, because you will find that the leaders of our political parties do choose where they will sit for election. So, for example, our Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, wouldn't necessarily be running in a more conservative part of the country. They will always try to find him the safest Labour seat in the country, and they will put him in there. So it's not like, oh, Keir Starmer is from this area, this district where he was elected. No, they just find the safest option for him, put him in. He wins, of course, because it's a Labour stronghold, let's say. And then, of course, he wins the seat, because it's just obvious that this is a Labour stronghold and he will win.
So, in fact, you have less choice than people in Poland to vote.
So the result of that is that basically you have less choices, right? Because when you're voting in your district, any political party is unlikely to put 2 people to choose from, because it would split the votes, right? So they only put 1 person. Whereas in Poland, you have a list. You have, 10 people from the same party all running against each other. And you first elect the person, but that vote wouldn't be split. It still goes to the same party. So it's just, in my opinion, it's more fair. It's more representational in that respect, because you're voting for the person and the party. Whereas in the UK, you're voting for the party.
And why is their support declining so rapidly now?
Well, as I said, I don't believe their support existed to begin with. They had only 33% of the votes. It's an incredibly small portion of the entire election. So I don't think they had much support, and I see that the support is getting less and less each day.
But why?
So it seems that they have backtracked on a lot of the promises they made in the election. And it's gotten so bad in the UK that I think this weekend there was an open petition made, and it already has over 2 million signatures. And the petition is to call for another general election, based on the fact that Labour lied about many of the things that they're implementing right now, that they said they wouldn't implement. So, for example, they're taking energy subsidies away from pensioners. This was something they said they wouldn't do, and after the election, they are doing. So you can see that they've broken many promises that they made in the very start.
Let's talk about future. Do you see any hope for the West? What would need to happen?
So there's always hope, Sławomir, and I do believe Poland is one of those hopes. I think you can look at the mistakes made by Western governments, and you can do things a little differently. You can adapt. you can go back to those fundamental ideas that made the West so great in the first place. You can show the West what it means to be the West, because I think most of them have forgotten. And that's one of the reasons I live in this country, is I do see the hope for the future here and not in my own country. And I do think many people from the West in the future will start to see it how I see it. And I expect many more people like me to move to Poland if things get much worse in the West.
You have Polish flag here. Have you ever tried to obtain Polish citizenship?
Citizenship? Not yet. It's much more complicated than what I have currently attained, which is permanent residency. I have a karta pobytu stałego. I hope I said that correctly. This entitles me to live here permanently. But it wasn't an easy task to get this. You know, it was my first experience with Polish bureaucracy, which I'm sure everybody knows what that's like. The people in the offices were very nice and helpful, but the system was just so difficult. But actually, I think that's a good thing. I would not change that.
You are the first fan of Polish bureaucracy I have ever met.
I wouldn't say I'm a fan, but it makes it difficult for people to gain Polish citizenship, right? And I think it should be difficult to attain Polish citizenship. I don't think the government should just be handing out Polish passports like candy to whoever wants one, which it is like that in some countries, right? So with the bureaucracy and the language barrier being very high, I think you guys can do something good with that.
That's the way.
That's the way.
You once told me about your brother who left school at the age of 15 to start working. How did that affect his life?
That's right. My brother left school at 15, and before he'd even sat any final exams, he'd already been accepted into the Royal Navy. And thank God that was an option for him, because he did not like school. I liked school, he did not. We were very different personalities in that way. And once he joined the Royal Navy, he specialized as an aircraft engineer. So nowadays...
He's an aircraft engineer without school?
That's right. He's an aircraft engineer without finishing, in Poland, high school, you would call it.
In Poland, we have requirement to study until the age of 18. What do you think about that?
Well, I don't think that's such a good idea. And I've had many students in Poland who express the frustrations about this. Basically, it boils down to this. A lot of people don't want to go to school. It's as simple as that. They don't want to be there. And you're forcing those people to stay until the age of 18. Those kind of people disrupt the classes. They take time from the teacher. They take resources from the school. It's just not a good environment to have them in the classroom. And I think where the British system is a little better is that those people, if they choose to, can leave, right? Because we have three options. You can work, you can continue studying academic subjects, or you can take more practical subjects like hairdressing or plumbing or something like this. And for those people who want to just go and work, I'm not writing them off. I don't think that it's the end of their life if they don't stay at school till 18. You know, in my brother's example, he's now working in the private sector. He's an engineer, highly qualified engineer. He earns a lot of money from this. I would say he's a success. And he didn't finish high school with particularly good grades. So that's one negative aspect of the Polish education system. But I would like to say a positive. I do believe that the standard of education in Poland is very high. I think that your educated are more educated than the educated in Britain. And why do I think this? You know, I work with a lot of people in Poland, mostly professionals, and I see they're extremely driven. They're very knowledgeable, very intelligent. And without fail, all of them complain about the Polish education system. So there must be something right in what they're saying. But in the back of my mind, I'm always thinking to myself, but this is the system that produced you, you know. You're an incredible person. How is it that this terrible system produces such great businessmen? And I think that's because the standards are higher in Poland. You do have a wider gap between educated and uneducated people. But I feel it's because you keep a high standard. It's not easy to pass a history matura in Poland. It's quite easy to pass a history A-level, for example, in Britain. And I think that's because in Britain we lowered the standards to give more people the grades Whereas I feel in Poland, you guys keep it high so that only the most qualified people get those grades, if that makes sense.
Maybe. And where do you see Poland heading in the future?
That's a question I would like to ask you.
But I'm asking you.
But you're asking me. Okay. So from my point of view, I feel like Poland is maybe 15 to 20 years behind the West in terms of its progressive ideology or wokeism. And I see that you're slowly starting to go down the same path. I hope it doesn't happen, and I hope there are some changes to this, that you can see the mistakes made by this ideology. But it does feel to me that you're behind us, but still going on the same path. What do you think?
I see this in a very similar way. I'm afraid of that too, but I believe that we have a will and time to change it.
I think so. I hope so.
What do you think about the UK's involvement in the war in Ukraine?
At the start, I had no objections with providing aid and help for a country facing an outside aggressor. However, I think the situation's kind of changed in recent months, where we're now providing the kind of weaponry that might escalate tensions with a nuclear-armed state. I think that's unacceptable. I don't understand the logic process of putting the world on the brink of nuclear war for the sake of some eastern Ukrainian provinces. I think it's time to sit down at the table, and I hope the UK's involvement takes some steps backwards from where it currently is.
I'm afraid of that too, because I think that if Great Britain will fight with Russia, it will be in Poland.
Yeah, we'll be fighting in your back garden.
And your.
Yeah.
What advice would you give to Poles to prevent them following the same path as the UK?
I think protecting your freedom of speech has to be the number one thing. It's going to be incredibly important in the next few years. I believe you have a hate speech bill currently in the Sejm. Am I correct?
Yes.
Right. So as I mentioned earlier, I think if that gets into power, that they will quickly evolve what these things mean, and it will grow out of control. So protecting your free speech is number one. It's not racist to not want to give your country away to other people. It simply isn't racist. And people on the left will try to say that it is. So my number one advice is protect your free speech. And if you want to do that, vote for my good friend Sławomir.
Thank you for that, and thank you very much for the interview.
It was my pleasure. Thank you for having me on.